As a society in 2025, we love throwing out some edgy terms and fiery phrases like stick to your guns or caught red-handed. Some of our everyday speech seems like harmless fun, but not so much if you knew the origin stories. We've held on to some truly disturbing expressions from the days of public executions, the early days of colonialism, and even slavery. I'm Mike with List 25, and today we're going to get into 25 everyday sayings with surprisingly violent origins. But before we begin, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe with that notification bell. It truly helps our channel grow. With that being said, let's get into it. 25. Bite the bullet. Back in the days before modern medicine, an injured soldier had a rough time getting proper care, especially if they were getting surgery. They were raw dogging the whole procedure. There wasn't any anesthesia, pain blockers, or numbing drugs. How did doctors help patients overcome pain? They handed those poor soldiers bullets to bite down on while they cut, sawed, and stitched them up. Hence, the term bite the bullet was born. The bullet was tough enough to keep soldiers from biting their tongue, and surprisingly, not tough enough to break many teeth. Was it a perfect solution? No. But did it give the patient something to focus on? Yes. That's the dark origin behind the phrase. But over time, it began to change. Instead of it just being a not-so-fun saying during the gruesome battlefield times, it became a term we use when we do things we don't exactly love, like getting braces, dragging ourselves to the gym, or paying bills. Next time you tell someone to bite the bullet, just know that you're echoing the courage of people who had to survive the worst with nothing but a bullet to bite on. That kind of makes our everyday struggles seem a little less daunting, right? 24. Caught red-handed. Long before the days of your mother catching you red-handed raiding the cookie jar, the term had a very different and very bloody meaning. This wasn't cutesy or calm, and it definitely was no laughing matter. The phrase originated in 15th century Scotland, where the laws were a wee bit sideways. If you happened to be accused of poaching or murder, for instance, you couldn't be convicted unless you were very literally found with blood on your hands. Move over, no body, no crime. For the Scots, it was no blood, no crime. Sounds terrible for the general public, right? It was. What's worse is if you got caught with blood on you, but you weren't involved in the crime at all. Guilty by red stain. Sorry. Imagine trying to save a friend and ending up going to prison for their death instead. Thankfully, nowadays we need actual evidence of crimes, and the term is used more in jest than anything else. 23. Kick the bucket. It should come as no surprise that kick the bucket doesn't have a sunshine and roses origin story. We all know it's referring to death. But did you know it wasn't linked to human deaths? It was actually tied to the way animals were slaughtered in the 16th century. I would maybe fast forward this fact if you're faint of heart. Back then, farmers used to hang livestock like pigs from a wooden beam or frame, which they called a bucket. Horrifically, as the animal took its final breaths, it would kick and thrash against the beam, therefore, kicking the bucket. Somehow, over time, this saying has changed in meaning. While we still use it as a death terminology, it's become a more lighthearted, almost cartoonish phrase. It's kind of wild when you think about it. We took a term used to describe brutal animal death and made it kind of a joke. Life truly does have a cheeky way of mocking mortality. 22. Over the barrel. When someone says you're over the barrel, they're saying you're stuck in a situation you've got no control over, or someone else is calling all the shots. We all know this. We all use this. But did you know how it came to be? Over the barrel first showed up in American English in the late 1880s, and it has some dreadful roots. Some believe this expression came from the practice of trying to revive drowning victims by laying them face down over a barrel. It was thought that doing this and rolling them back and forth would push the water out of their lungs. Did it work? Probably not. Thankfully, we have modern CPR, or we'd all be cooked. Not violent enough for you? Well, let's dive into the second theory. This one states the term was used when a person was being punished by literally bending someone over the barrel to give them a public flogging. Imagine how embarrassing that spanking would be. Yikes. Either way you look at it, if you're over the barrel, you're not having a good time. 21. Go ballistic. There's something a bit dark sounding when someone says they're about to go ballistic. You know the meltdown that's coming won't be your average run-of-the-mill tantrum. Nope. They're about to go full-on nuclear, which fits since that's kind of where the term comes from. Allow me to explain. This idiom began to pop up in everyday language around the mid-20th century, around the time the world was hearing an awful lot about military technology and nuclear weapons. More specifically, this comes straight out of the Cold War and refers back to the powerful ballistic missile. Like the bomb, when people go ballistic, they completely set off, lose control, and explode in anger. And once someone gets in this mindset, it's really hard to steer them back. While no one's actually launching rockets during a family argument, the phrase still carries that sense of unstoppable fiery energy. 20. Bury the hatchet. These days, if you hear of someone trying to bury the hatchet, it means they're trying to make peace. They're out there trying to hug it out, kiss and make up, or at least forgive someone who wronged them. It sounds nice, right? It is. And it was back when the saying came to be. Until it was stolen from its roots. The phrase actually comes from a very real and symbolic tradition practiced by the Iroquois. When rival tribes decided to end a war, they would very literally bury their hatchets and other weapons in the ground. It was a physical promise that the fighting was over and peace would be restored. It was a grand gesture. Until European colonists came to the land, that is. The settlers noticed this happening as early as the 1600s. By the 1700s, the phrase was gentrified. Over time, it moved away from its original cultural ritual and became a turn of speech in our everyday life. Instead of being symbolic, it's now been simplified to mean anything from ending a war to letting go of a grudge. 19. As pleased as punch. We love a saying rooted in pop culture, and this next one comes straight from a 17th century puppet show called Punch and Judy. Adapted from Italy's Commedia dell'arte, Punch and Judy gained widespread popularity in England, but it probably should have come with a content warning. These weren't your average puppets. Punch, short for Punchinello, was a violent and mischievous character known for taking unrepentant delight in his own evil doings and crackling laughter. This little baddie would torment his enemies and gleefully proclaim, "That's the way you do it," which would have children and adults in stitches. By the 18th and 19th centuries, audiences started saying, "as pleased as punch," as an homage to the sinister puppet when describing someone who was smugly delighted with their own actions. So folks, remember that when you say someone is as pleased as punch, you're not just saying someone is happy, you're comparing them to an evil little puppet. It kind of makes it even better, doesn't it? 18. Cover your mouth when you yawn. We're taught to cover our mouths when we cough and sneeze so we don't spread germs. But have you ever wondered why we do the same when we yawn? As it turns out, being told to cover your mouth when you yawn is rooted in ancient superstition that yawning was the body releasing the soul, or a vital spirit, from your body. By covering your mouth, you were able to protect yourself. But that's not all. Greeks and Romans believed yawning could spread disease. Then, by the Middle Ages, Christians believed it wasn't just prudent and modest to cover your mouth, but it would also prevent demonic influences from entering the body. By the 19th century, it was simply thought to be polite and hygienic, and that's kind of how we use it today. 17. Pulling someone's leg. When you hear someone say they're just pulling your leg, you know they're just playing around. At least, that's what it means in 2025. Back in 18th century England, though, it was anything but. Pulling someone's leg wasn't a joke at all. It was actually linked to a crime. Street thieves would trick people by literally pulling on their legs and knocking them to the ground to make them easier to rob. That's not exactly playful at all. But even worse is how some historians believe the phrase truly came to be. Way before the criminals began using the term when they tripped up their victims, it's believed the term was used when someone was sentenced to death by hanging. Friends and family of the condemned would sometimes pull on the person's leg to speed things up and lessen their suffering. How helpful. How grim. 16. Mad as a Hatter. Move over, Alice, because your adventures in Wonderland weren't the origin story for the term Mad as a Hatter. While that's how most of us know it, Lewis Carroll wasn't the first to coin it. It actually comes from a very real and kind of scary place. Leave it to the 18th century to add this to our nightmare fuel. Back then, hat makers, or hatters, worked with a lot of animal fur to make fancy hats. The trick to matting the fur was mercury nitrate. The problem? Mercury nitrate gives off toxic fumes that truly messed up the hatter's nervous system. The effects were absolutely brutal, and hatters often developed slurred speech, wild mood swings, tremors, and hallucinations. Often called Mad Hatter disease, we can see why the term was used. As for Carroll, he took the term and swung it in a very different direction. Now we think of the whimsical Mad Hatter, and the phrase is cemented in pop culture history. 15. Sold down the river. This next saying gets dark, and originates during one of the darkest times in American history. So much so, you may want to reconsider using it from now on. I'm talking about the phrase, sold down the river. This dates back to the horrific time of slavery here in America. As you may have already guessed, the term was used when enslaved people from places like Virginia and Kentucky were sold to traders who sent them down the Mississippi or Ohio rivers to the deep south. They very literally sold them down the river, often to worse conditions than they were already living through. How did it become part of everyday speech? By the mid-1800s, people were using it all the time, and it became shorthand for being cheated, backstabbed, or ripped off. So the next time you go to use it, really think about the heavy history it carries and how it was part of the most diabolical and appalling parts of American history. 14. Wreak Havoc. You've heard the idiom wreak havoc thrown around, but do you know where it came from? As it turns out, it was a seriously dark military command. Let's dive into this doozy. Wreak comes from Old English and means to avenge or drive out. Havoc comes from the Anglo-French harvel, meaning plunder. Put them together, and you're basically saying inflict destruction and loot everything in sight. That's not great, but it gets darker from there. Wreak Havoc was born from the medieval battle term cry havoc. When commanders shouted it, soldiers knew it was time to go wild and ransack cities and pillage until their heart's content. Over centuries, cry havoc died out as wreak havoc began to replace the term. It began popping up in English writing by the 14th century and took on the meaning of general destruction and chaos. So the next time your toddler is tearing up the living room and making a mess, know that when you say they are wreaking havoc, it came from a battle cry. 13. Let the cat out of the bag. We all know the phrase, let the cat out of the bag means to spill the beans. Like when your mother accidentally tells you about the surprise party she planned for your birthday. Yeah, still not over that. How dare I have my own moment? Anyway, have you ever wondered where it came from? Well, let me tell you. This little nugget cemented itself as a popular saying back in medieval times, specifically in the medieval marketplace circuit. At the time, it was popular to sell piglets in sacks. Weird, right? But what made it even more heinous was that sometimes those weren't even piglets. Con artists would rip off customers by replacing those little piggies with kittens instead. Not only were cats worth nothing at the time, but they've never exactly been a popular food source. This little shady trick would have the buyer fuming when they got home and opened the satchel, only to find that instead of dinner, they let the cat out of the bag. 12. No room to swing a cat. Speaking of cat lingo, here's another one we need to talk about. Why and when people began saying there is no room to swing a cat. Now, before you start picturing someone literally spinning their poor kitten around like a furry lasso, that's not why. Unfortunately, it is much darker than that. This comes from the 16th century, when the British Navy used a dreadful weapon called the cat-o'-nine-tails. Trust me when I say it was a punishment tool you never want used against you. It was made up of 9 knotted ropes meant to inflict maximum pain on sailors who stepped out of line. Yeah, not even on the enemy. They used this on their own people. Below deck, space was so ridiculously cramped that sailors would often joke that down in the hold there was no room to swing a cat, making it a dark, dingy, but bit of a safe space. It was written down for the first time in 1771 and has stuck ever since. 11. Meeting a deadline. These days when someone says you need to meet a deadline, you see it as getting your work done before you have an angry boss breathing down your neck while tapping on their watch. But the phrase comes from something more intense than that. It's honestly kind of terrifying, actually. During the American Civil War, there was a Confederate prison called Andersonville that was built to hold Union soldiers. The prison was an absolute nightmare, as it was packed with upwards of 10,000 men inside. As if that doesn't sound bad enough, the prison had a literal line that was horrifically called the deadline. If a prisoner stepped over the boundaries, even by accident, the guards would shoot to kill. No warnings, no questions asked. Meeting a deadline literally meant you'd be meeting your death if you crossed that line. 10. A blockbuster. When you hear about a blockbuster today, it's usually in reference to a giant Hollywood hit, the kind that makes us all rush to the theater to eat some buttery popcorn and stare at the screen. The true meaning, though, is way more explosive. Literally. During World War II, a blockbuster had nothing to do with movies. It was about bombs. Massive explosions so powerful they could wipe out an entire city block in one hit. Even the newspapers used the term to describe this terrifying weapon that destroys everything in its path. So how did it go from being a war saying to a film? In the early 40s, if a movie got so big it would blow the audience away, it was labeled a blockbuster. Movies like Samson and Delilah were advertised as true blockbusters, and the name stuck. So instead of blockbuster being something that levels a neighborhood, it's about the explosive drama we see on the silver screen. 9. Bulldozer. Now I've got to talk about the word bulldozer, and I'm not talking about the machine. I'm talking about when we use it in slang. Like when your coworker is trying to bulldoze you during a meeting and step on your toes, or when you're bulldozing through a crowd. Did you know the term has violent roots? Well, it's on this list, so of course it does. Around the 1870s, during the Reconstruction era in the US South, bulldoze meant a large or overwhelming dose of punishment, often utilizing a bullwhip or brute force. It was all about violent intimidation, mainly by white supremacist groups who were working overtime to suppress black people, especially suppressing black voters. Interestingly, the word was lent to the machine when the giant tractors were built because of how easily they shoved right through dirt, rocks, and unstable ground. However, from the beginning, bulldozing wasn't about building roads. It was about tearing people down. 8. Stick to your guns. Nowadays, when you stick to your guns, it means you are not about to back down. You're refusing to change, even if your friends roast your decision, like when you're trying to order a pumpkin spice latte in July. Historically, though, this had a way more threatening definition. The phrase comes from the 18th century, when armies heavily relied on artillery and cannons. In the battle chaos, when enemy fire rained down, survival instincts had soldiers fighting the urge to run. The term was used to remind artillery crews to stay put, keep firing, and stick to their guns. The phrase began moving off the battlefield and into everyday language, and is now a core staple in our vocabulary. While it's still about standing your ground, instead of facing down the enemy, we use it to stick to our decisions. 7. Diehard. We all know Die Hard is the best Christmas movie in history, but long before Bruce Willis was crawling through air ducts barefoot, the verbiage had a rather shady meaning. It all started in 1811 during the Battle of Albuera in the Peninsular War. The British 57th Regiment was under a brutal attack by the French forces, and things weren't looking great. Commander Lieutenant Colonel William Inglis was the first to coin Die Hard when he used it as the battle cry, "Die Hard, 57th," to keep his troops committed. That's all it took to keep his soldiers moving, and they quickly gained the nickname the Diehards. Today, whether you're a die-hard fan of a band, a die-hard supporter of a sports team, or a die-hard believer that your grandma's cooking is unbeatable, you're echoing a phrase that started with soldiers literally fighting for their lives. The movie may be great, but the original diehards were the ones on the battlefield. 6. Saved by the Bell. I can't talk about TV and movie titles that started off gruesome without discussing Saved by the Bell. As it turns out, Zach Morris and his entertaining antics have nothing on the real meaning of the term. It had nothing to do with school bells or Screech. This phrase's origins are way creepier. It comes from one of many people's deepest fears, being buried alive. In the 17th century, people were terrified of being buried prematurely. Why? Because it happened more than a few times. Imagine hitting the bottle a little too hard, and instead of everybody recognizing you've passed out in an alcoholic stupor, they mistake you for being dead and toss you in the ground. Oof. Medical knowledge wasn't exactly top-notch back then, and stories of people being buried alive were spreading like wildfire. To ease that fear, folks started to be buried in safety coffins. They had little bells attached to strings tied around the person's fingers or toes. If they were accidentally buried alive, all they needed to do was move around enough to be saved by the bell, ringing out. So rescuers would grab shovels and get them out of there. While historians debate whether this was a widespread practice or a myth fueled by society's obsession with taphophobia, the idea stuck around, and Saved by the Bell became a common phrase. So the next time you hear it, be glad you're probably talking about the TV show or being saved from a boring conversation by the ringing of your phone, and not about clawing your way out of a coffin. 5. Goes down in flames. When we say something is going down in flames, it's usually because something has failed in the most dramatic, spectacular way possible. Like when you're trying to make a cake, but it ends with the kitchen looking like a war zone and your fire alarm screaming. But this idiom didn't start in the kitchen. It came from something way more literal and way scarier. Going down in flames came from when a plane was hit in battle and could crash to the ground in a fiery disaster. During World War II, the image became ingrained in soldiers. They saw it on the daily. So much so that by 1940, the phrase had taken off and become part of the regular vocabulary. 4. Run the gauntlet. Now for something no one will enjoy. Have you heard the term run the gauntlet? Sure you have. Do you know how it came to be? No? Well, I do. And soon, you will too, because if I have to know this, you get to as well. You know how much I love to share the trauma with you guys. Anyway, it stems from the Swedish word gatlopp, which means lane course. And oh boy, did people take that and make it as gruesome as they could. Run the Gauntlet originated from the horrific historical practice of punishing soldiers by stripping them naked and forcing them to run between two rows of their comrades who beat them with ropes and sticks the entire time. Does this sound like something out of a Walmart $5 bin horror flick? Absolutely. Was this sometimes fatal? Yes. Not everyone made it out of the gauntlet alive. So remember that the next time you use it. 3. Bombshell. For the most part, when we hear the word bombshell, we think of a gorgeous blonde bombshell like Pamela Anderson during her Baywatch days. But that's not exactly how the word was used in the 18th century. Back then, it was much more literal. All the way up to the 19th century, when someone described a bombshell, they truly did mean the actual explosive artillery shell. It was during the 19th century that the term began to change meaning, from an unexpected event, startling news, or shocking political moves. It wasn't until the 20th century that it switched up once again to become more Hollywood and star-studded. A super fun fact is that the first starlet to be described as a blonde bombshell was actress Jean Harlow. She was the OG. And oh yes, she deserved it. That woman was a stunner. 2. Heads will roll. Heads will roll sounds super dramatic, right? And these days we say it far too often about even the most minor inconvenience. Wi-Fi goes out, heads will roll. Didn't get the sales price at the checkout? Heads will roll. Coworkers are slacking? That's right, heads will roll. But have you ever wondered where this came from? For centuries, Europeans loved to hand down the death penalty like it was nothing special. And the favorite form of deadly punishment was beheading. Public executions were community events, and everyone in town showed up to watch the guillotine blade fall and the person's head, well, roll. And oh yes, did they roll. It was brutal, bloody, and absolutely horrifying. Thankfully, by the 19th century, the phrase began to move away from the chopping block and became the fairly normal and far less violent idiom we know and love to use today. So, think about that the next time you throw it out there. 1. No quarter given. Back in the age of pirates and warships, no quarter given was a popular phrase. And it wasn't just tough talk. If you heard someone say that, it was time to duck for cover, because a death sentence was about to crash down. In battle, quarter meant mercy, which wasn't something pirates often extended to their enemies. In fact, they used the term to scare their nemesis into submission and get them to surrender before the fight even started. It was truly the one way to save yourself. Today, it's lost its bloody edge and doesn't exactly pack the same bloody punch. While it still means there's no mercy or leniency, we aren't exactly holding swords and forcing people to walk the plank when we say it. And that's all I got for you today. But can you think of any other phrases with violent origins? If so, share them with the class and drop them in the comments. Let's see what other sayings we use on the reg that should probably be taken out of our vocabulary. If you want more, check out our other video, 25 Unexpected Origins of Popular Sayings. And now for my favorite part of every video, mostly every video, trivia time. Now, can you answer this doozy without Google? Make sure you put your answers below so we can see how many of you are in the know. In medieval times, what was the main purpose of a moat around a castle? Was it A, to raise fish for the castle kitchen? B, to provide a place for knights to practice swimming? C, to keep attackers from reaching the castle walls? Or D, to store extra drinking water for the villagers? And that's it for now. Before you leave, make sure to hit the subscribe button, like bell, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. There's no like bell, but hit the like button. And I will catch you guys again next time. Adios.